Americans are finally waking up to the retirement lie, and I want to give you the two numbers that prove it, because when I saw them side by side, I actually said something out loud that I probably shouldn't repeat. The Employee Benefit Research Institute has been running the Retirement Confidence Survey for 36 years. It's the longest-running survey of its kind in this country, and this year's results came out in April. 39% of workers say they expect to retire at 70 or older, or never retire at all. Only 10% of retirees say that's what actually happened to them. 39% planning it, 10% doing it, and it goes the other way too. 12% of workers plan to retire before 60. 29% of retirees actually did. The median retirement age in this country is 62. Most people retire before 65, and nearly half say they retired earlier than they planned. So the single most common retirement plan in America, which is I'll just work longer, is a plan that roughly 3 out of 4 people who make it never get to carry out. You don't get to choose. That's the lie. Let me show you the rest of it. The plan is work longer, and the data says you probably don't get to. Let me stay on this first, because I think it's the single most important thing in this whole video, and almost nobody knows it. Here's what happens in a person's head around age 55. They look at their savings, and the number is not what they hoped, and a feeling comes over them that I recognize because I've had it, which is a kind of panic followed immediately by a comforting thought. The comforting thought is, it's fine, I'll just work a few more years. And that thought does something very specific. It lets you stop worrying. It converts a terrifying problem into a manageable one. Instead of needing to save a lot more right now, which is hard, you simply need to work until 68 or 70, which feels entirely within your control, except it isn't within your control. That's the whole point. The EBRI numbers this year are stark. 39% of workers expect to retire at 70 or older or never. 10% of retirees say it happened that way. And a separate EBRI study, the 2024 Spending in Retirement Study, surveyed 3,600 retirees between 62 and 75. 58% of them left the workforce earlier than they had planned. 58%. And the leading reasons were health issues and workplace reorganization. Read those two reasons again, because neither one of them is a choice. Health issues. You cannot decide not to have a heart attack at 63. You cannot schedule your back to hold out until 70. You cannot negotiate with arthritis or a cancer diagnosis or the fatigue that comes with a chronic condition you didn't know you had at 50. And workplace reorganization. That's the polite phrase for what happens when a company restructures and your position is eliminated at 61. And you spend 18 months applying for jobs and getting nothing back, and eventually you stop calling it a job search and start calling it retirement, because that's what it has become. There's a third reason that shows up in this research too, and it's the one nobody plans for at all. Caregiving. Somebody in your family gets sick, and it's you who has to stop working, and it's almost always the woman. So the plan is, I'll work until 70, and the reality is your body, your employer, or your family decides, and you find out which one on a random Tuesday. Now here's why this matters so much, and it's not just about the missing years of income. When you plan to work until 70, you're actually making 3 assumptions at once. You're assuming you'll have more years of contributions, you're assuming you'll have fewer years of withdrawals, and you're assuming you can delay Social Security to get the maximum benefit. If you're forced out at 62, you lose all 3 at the same time. You stop contributing 8 years early, you start withdrawing 8 years early, and you very likely claim Social Security early, at a permanent reduction of about 30% from the full retirement age amount, for the rest of your life. That's not one setback, that's 3 simultaneous ones, arriving on a day you didn't choose. And that's why I call it the retirement lie. Not because anybody deliberately lied to us, because the entire structure of American retirement planning rests on an assumption about control that the actual data does not support. You are not planning your retirement. You are hoping to have a say in it. And I want to say something to the people watching this who are in their 50s right now, because you're the ones this matters most for. I know exactly what it feels like to look at your balance at 55 and reach for that thought. I did it. I remember the specific relief of deciding I'd just work longer, and how it let me put the whole subject down for another 2 years. What I'd say to you now is not to panic, it's to change one thing about how you're planning. Build your plan for the age you'd be forced out at, not the age you intend to leave at. If your plan works at 63 and you make it to 68, wonderful. You have 5 bonus years of contributions and 5 fewer years of withdrawals, and you'll be in genuinely good shape. If your plan only works at 68 and your knee goes at 62, you have no plan at all. You have a hope that failed, and you find out at the worst possible moment. That's the entire adjustment. Same information, Different assumption. Completely different outcome. And it costs you nothing to make it today. Here is what people actually have saved, and it is not what the adverts suggest. Now let me give you the balances, because I think a lot of people are walking around feeling uniquely behind, and I want you to see where everybody actually is. Vanguard publishes a report every year called How America Saves. It's based on about 5 million real retirement plan participants, so it's not a survey where people guess, it's actual account data. The 2026 report puts the median 401k balance at $44,115. $44,000. Now that figure includes young workers who just started, so let me give you the number for people closer to the end. For workers aged 55 to 64, the median 401k balance is $107,269, and the average for that same group is $305,000. I want you to notice that gap, because it's the most important thing in this whole section. The average is nearly 3 times the median. That happens when a small number of very large balances pull the average up. A handful of executives with 2 or 3 million in their accounts drags the average for the whole group up by something like $160,000 above where the typical person actually is. Which means every time you see an article about the average 401k balance, you are looking at a number that describes almost nobody. The median is the real person. The average is the story. Now, to be fair, 401k balances aren't everything. Many people have IRAs, old plans from previous employers, pensions, home equity, and other savings. So let me give you the broader figure. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances puts median total retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64 at about $185,000. That's a better number, and it's still sobering. And here's the one that genuinely stopped me. Analysis of the Federal Reserve data found that 1 in 4 near retirees, meaning people aged 55 to 64, has less than $19,000 saved. 1 in 4, $19,000, 10 years or less from retiring. And roughly 28% of Americans have nothing saved at all. Now let me do the arithmetic that nobody does out loud. If you take that median 401k balance of $44,000 and apply the standard 4% withdrawal guideline, you get about $147 a month. $147. If you take the median for the 55 to 64 group, $107,000, 4% gives you about $4,300 a year, about $358 a month. Meanwhile, Northwestern Mutual's 2026 study found that Americans believe they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably. $1.46 million, against a median 401k of $44,000. One analysis put it plainly. The median saver is roughly 33 times behind that number. 33 times. So let me say something to you directly, because I know some of you just felt sick. If you're behind, you are not the exception. You are the ordinary case. The people in the retirement commercials, walking on a beach with a golden retriever at 58, are not representative of anything. They are a marketing image produced by an industry that sells financial products. You have been comparing yourself to an advertisement. And I want to add something about why those numbers look the way they do. Because it isn't only about how much people saved. EBRI's own data shows something striking about job tenure. Workers in their 60s with more than 30 years at the same employer had average balances around $570,000, which is roughly 9 times what their short tenure peers had. 9 times. Now, part of that is that people who stay 30 years at one company tend to have better jobs with better benefits, but part of it is simpler and more mechanical. If you change employers 6 times over a career, you have 6 separate accounts, 6 waiting periods before you're eligible, 6 vesting schedules where you may have left employer money behind, and 6 opportunities to cash something out during a hard year. And the American labor market spent the last 40 years telling people to change jobs, because changing jobs is how you get a raise when your employer won't give you one. So the same economy that made job hopping financially necessary also built a retirement system that quietly penalizes it. Nobody designed that. It's just what happens when you attach retirement savings to individual employers in a country where nobody stays anywhere. If you've moved around, and most of us have, that's a structural reason your balance looks the way it does, and it isn't a reflection of your discipline. That $1.46 million number is doing real damage. I want to spend some time on that $1 million figure because I've come to believe it does more harm than almost any other number in personal finance. Here's what happens when somebody hears they need $1.46 million. If they have $44,000, they don't think I should save more. They think that's impossible, so why bother? That's the actual psychological effect of an unreachable target. It doesn't motivate. It produces surrender. Behavioral researchers have documented this repeatedly, and anybody who has ever been handed a goal they knew they couldn't hit knows it in their gut. So let me take that number apart, because it deserves it. First, where does it come from? It's a survey number. It's what Americans believe they need, which is not the same as what anybody calculated they need. It's a feeling, aggregated. Second, it almost always ignores Social Security. And Social Security is not a small thing. The average benefit is running somewhere around $1,900 a month, which is about $23,000 a year. Now here's how to think about that properly, and this is the reframe I most want to give you. Using the same 4% guideline in reverse, generating $23,000 a year from a portfolio would require roughly $575,000 in savings. So if you receive an average Social Security benefit, you already have the equivalent of more than $500,000 of retirement assets. It just doesn't show up on a statement, so it doesn't feel real. And it's better than $500,000 in a portfolio. In 3 specific ways, it's adjusted for inflation each year. It cannot run out no matter how long you live, and it doesn't fall when the market falls. There is no product you can buy that does all 3 of those things at a price an ordinary person can afford. For a couple with 2 average benefits, you're talking about something equivalent to well over $1 million in portfolio terms. So the picture changes completely once you count what you actually have, rather than only what's in the account. Third, the $1 million target assumes a spending level that may have nothing to do with your life. If your house is paid off, if you live somewhere with a reasonable cost of living, if your tastes are modest, your number is dramatically lower than somebody with a mortgage in an expensive metro. The honest way to figure out your own number is not to look up an average. It's to work out what you actually spend, subtract what Social Security will cover, and calculate what the remainder requires. Do that, and a great many people find the gap is far smaller than the headline suggested. Not zero, not comfortable, but not 1.46 million either. Now, I want to be honest about the other side, because I don't want to talk anybody into false comfort. For some people, the gap is genuinely large, and no amount of reframing fixes it. If you're 62 with $19,000 in a rent payment, arithmetic is arithmetic, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise. But even there, knowing your actual number matters, because it's the difference between a problem you can work on and a fog you can only be afraid of. The 4% rule is not a rule, and the man who invented it keeps saying so. Let me talk about the 4% rule, because I've been using it in this video, and I owe you an explanation of what it actually is, and it is not what most people think. The 4% rule was developed by a financial planner named William Bengen, who looked at roughly 75 years of historical American market data and asked a specific question. What's the largest amount somebody could withdraw in the first year of retirement, adjusted for inflation each year afterward, without running out of money over a 30-year retirement? His answer, based on the worst historical periods, was about 4%. So $1 million portfolio, $40,000 in year 1, adjusted upward for inflation each year. Now, here is what people have turned that into. And it's the problem. They've turned it into a law of nature. 4% forever, guaranteed. It is not that. It is one researcher's finding about one country's historical data over one particular period, and Bengen himself has spent the years since revising it, refining it, and cautioning people about applying it mechanically. He suggested higher figures under some conditions, and there's been continuous academic debate about it for 3 decades. And there are several things about it that people routinely get wrong. It assumed a 30-year retirement. If you retire at 62 and live to 95, that's 33 years, and the arithmetic is different. It assumed a particular portfolio mix, generally around half stocks and half bonds. If your money is all in cash or all in one stock, the finding does not apply to you. It was based on American market history, which was the best-performing major market of the 20th century. Researchers who ran the same test on other countries' historical returns generally found lower safe rates. And it did not account for fees, which comes straight off the top. But here's the piece that matters most to somebody actually retiring, and it's the thing I want you to take away. The 4% finding is not really about how much you can spend. It's about surviving bad early years. Let me make that concrete, because it's abstract until you see it. Imagine 2 people who both retire with the same amount and who both experience the same average return over 30 years. Identical average. The only difference is the order the years arrive in. The first person gets a couple of bad years right at the start, then good ones. The second gets the good ones first, and the bad ones later. The second person can end up with substantially more money after 30 years, and in bad cases the first person runs out entirely, despite identical average returns. Why? Because the first person sold shares at depressed prices in years 1 and 2 to pay their bills, and those shares were permanently removed from the portfolio before the recovery happened. The recovery came, and there was less left to participate in it. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. And it explains why the year you retire matters enormously and why it is completely outside your control. That's what the research was actually testing. The dangerous scenario is not average returns. It's a significant market decline in the first few years of retirement while you're withdrawing. Because when you sell shares at depressed prices to pay your bills, those shares are gone. They don't participate in the recovery. So two retirees with identical average returns over 30 years can end up in completely different places, depending purely on what order the good and bad years arrived. That's called sequence of returns risk, and it is the single most underappreciated risk in retirement, and it matters most in roughly the 5 years either side of the day you stop working. Which leads to the practical thing, and it's the one piece of genuine financial mechanics I want to give you in this video. If you are within a few years of retiring, the most valuable thing you can do is have enough in cash and short-term safe assets to cover your spending needs for a couple of years, so that you are never forced to sell investments during a downturn to pay your electric bill. That's it. That's the whole idea. It's sometimes called a cash bucket, and it's not complicated. It doesn't make you more money. What it does is remove the one mistake that permanently damages a retirement, which is being a forced seller at the bottom. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't advice for your situation. But if you take one technical thing from this video to ask a fee-only fiduciary about, make it that. Nobody warned us that spending doesn't actually drop the way they said. Now here's another piece of standard advice that I think deserves a hard look, because a lot of us built plans on it. The advice was, you'll need about 70 or 80% of your pre-retirement income, because your expenses will drop, and the reasoning sounded solid. No more commuting, no more work clothes, no more payroll taxes, the mortgage may be paid off. The children are grown, you'll eat at home more. Some of that is true. Commuting costs really do go away. But here's what actually happens, and I've watched it in my own life and heard it from a great many of you. Your time costs money. When you worked 50 hours a week, you had almost no hours in which to spend money. Now you have all of them. And what people do in early retirement is exactly what they were looking forward to. They travel. They take up hobbies. They see grandchildren who live elsewhere. They finally do the kitchen. They eat out with friends because they finally have time to. Researchers who study retirement spending have described a shape that gets called the retirement spending smile. Spending is relatively high in the early active years, then declines through the middle years as people slow down, and then rises again at the end because of healthcare and long-term care costs. So it's not a steady decline. It's high, then lower, then high again. And the last part of that smile is the expensive one, because it's the part where you might need help with daily living, which, as I've said before, Medicare does not cover. There's a second thing nobody warns you about, and it's the one that got me. Healthcare costs go up, not down. If you retire before 65, you're in a genuinely difficult window because you're buying insurance on the open market at the age when it's most expensive, without an employer paying a share. And once you're on Medicare, the premiums come out of your Social Security check, and there are deductibles and coinsurance, and Part D drug costs, and everything Medicare doesn't cover, which, as we've discussed, includes your teeth, your eyes, and your ears. Fidelity has estimated for years that a retired couple should expect to need somewhere in the range of $300,000 for healthcare costs over the course of retirement, and that estimate has generally risen over time. Now let me give you the third one, which is the one that surprises people most. Inflation doesn't stop when you do. If you retire at 65 and live to 90, that's 25 years of prices rising while your portfolio has to keep up. At 3% inflation, prices roughly double in about 24 years. So the money that comfortably covered your life at 65 covers half of it at 90. That's why the inflation adjustment on Social Security is worth so much more than people realize, and why any income source that is not adjusted for inflation, including most pensions and most fixed annuities, quietly shrinks in real terms every single year you live. Somebody with a fixed pension of $2,000 a month at 65 has in purchasing power roughly $1,000 a month at 90. Nobody puts that on the statement. Most people have no idea what their money is actually invested in. Let me cover something quickly that I think is genuinely important and that almost nobody checks. Do you know what your retirement money is actually invested in? I ask because a lot of people don't, and it's not their fault. Most people got automatically enrolled in a plan at work. The money went somewhere by default, and they've never opened the statement beyond looking at the balance. Fidelity reported that 63% of their 401k participants had all of their money in a target date fund. A target date fund is a fund with a year in the name, like 2030 or 2035, and the idea is that it automatically shifts from stocks toward bonds as you approach that date. It's designed to be a one-decision solution, and honestly, as defaults go, it's a reasonable one. Far better than money sitting in cash for 30 years. But here are the things worth knowing about them. The date in the name is a target retirement year, not a promise. Different companies' funds with the same date can have meaningfully different mixes of stocks and bonds. One company's 2030 fund might be considerably more aggressive than another's. They're designed for an average person, and you are not average. If you have a pension, your situation is different. If you have no other savings, your situation is different. And the fees vary. Which brings me to the thing I most want you to check. Fees compound, and they compound against you in exactly the same way returns compound for you. A difference of 0.5% a year sounds like nothing. Over 30 years on a meaningful balance, 0.5% can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Over a lifetime of saving, the difference between a low-cost fund and an expensive one can be a six-figure difference in what you end up with, and the fees are frequently not obvious. There's the expense ratio on the fund itself, and there can also be planned administrative fees, and in some plans there are advisory fees on top of that. So here's what to actually do, and it takes about 20 minutes. Log into your plan and find the expense ratio for each fund you own. It'll be expressed as a percentage. Anything under about 0.25% is genuinely cheap. Anything approaching 1% or above is worth asking about. Look at whether your plan offers a lower cost index option than what you're currently in. A lot of plans do, and a lot of people are in a more expensive fund purely because it was the default years ago. And if you have old 401k accounts sitting at former employers, and a great many people do, find them. Those accounts sometimes have higher fees, and more importantly, money you've forgotten about is money you aren't managing. Vanguard did note something encouraging in their data, which is that 97% of plan assets available for distribution in 2025 were preserved, meaning most people who left a job kept the money invested rather than cashing it out. That's genuinely good news, and a big improvement over how people used to behave. But preserved isn't the same as optimized. Money can sit in an old plan for 15 years in an expensive fund while you never look at it. 20 minutes, go look. If you are behind, here is what actually moves the number. All right, let me give you the honest practical section, because I've spent a lot of this video telling you the plan doesn't work and I owe you what does, and I'm going to be straight with you rather than cheerful because I think you'd rather have that. If you're 55 with $100,000, you are not going to save your way to $1.46 million. That is not going to happen, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something. But there are 4 levers that genuinely move the number, and they're worth understanding in order of power. The first, and by far the most powerful, is when you claim Social Security. Claiming at 62 takes a permanent reduction of roughly 30% from your full retirement age benefit. Delaying past full retirement age earns you about 8% more per year, up to 70, which means the difference between claiming at 62 and claiming at 70 is enormous. On a benefit that would be $2,000 at 67, you're looking at roughly $1,400 at 62 and roughly $2,400 at 70. Same work history, 70% difference in monthly income for life, determined entirely by a date. And if you're married, this is even more important than it looks, because when one spouse dies, the survivor keeps the larger of the two benefits. So the higher earner's claiming date is really a decision about what the survivor lives on for the rest of their life. Now, I want to be balanced. Delaying isn't right for everybody. If you have a serious health condition or you genuinely need the money at 62 and the alternative is racking up credit card debt, then claiming early may be the correct decision. This is a real calculation, not a rule, but it is the single largest financial lever available to most Americans, and an enormous number of people claim at 62 without ever knowing what it costs them. The second lever is working a bit longer, if you can, with the enormous caveat that this whole video is about how you may not get to choose. Every additional year does 3 things at once. You add contributions, you subtract a year of withdrawals, and you get closer to a higher Social Security benefit. That's why it's such a powerful lever mathematically. But given that 58% of retirees left earlier than planned, I'd say this: treat additional working years as a bonus if you get them, not as the foundation of your plan. Build the plan for 63 and be delighted if you make it to 68. The third lever is catch-up contributions, and this is where there's genuinely good news that a lot of people don't know about. If you're 50 or older, you can contribute an additional amount above the standard limit, and every plan is required to offer it. For 2026, that's $8,000 on top of the standard 401k limit. And there's a newer provision from the Secure 2.0 law, a larger super catch-up available specifically for people aged 60 through 63, which for 2026 is $11,250. If you're in that 4-year window and you have the capacity, that's a meaningful opportunity that only exists for those specific years. The fourth lever is the one nobody wants to hear, and it's reducing what you need rather than increasing what you have. Housing is the whole game. It's the largest expense for most households, and it's the one where a decision can change everything. Downsizing, moving somewhere cheaper, paying off a mortgage, or taking in a housemate does more to fix a retirement gap than almost any investment decision. And it's better than an investment decision in one specific way. If you cut your monthly expenses by $500, that's exactly equivalent in retirement terms to having an additional $150,000 in savings at a 4% withdrawal rate. $150,000 from a decision, not from a market return. Nobody frames it that way, and they should. And there's a fifth lever that I hesitate to include because it's not really financial, but it may be the most valuable one of all: your health. I know how that sounds coming in the middle of a money video, but look at the two leading reasons people are forced out of work early: health issues and workplace reorganization. You have some influence over one of those and none over the other. Every year of working capacity you preserve is worth more than any investment return you're likely to earn. If staying employable to 68 instead of 62 is worth 6 years of contributions, 6 fewer years of withdrawals, and a substantially larger Social Security benefit, then the walking, the strength training, the sleep, and the actually going to the doctor are financial decisions. I've never seen a retirement calculator with a field for that. It might be the most important input there is. Half the people I know are counting on their house, and that is its own lie. I want to cover the backup plan because when I talk to people who know they're behind on savings, there's almost always a second answer, and it's the same one every time. Well, I've got the house. And I understand it completely, because for most Americans, the house genuinely is the largest asset they own. Home equity is a real thing, and it has real value. But I want to walk through what actually happens when people try to convert a house into retirement income, because there are 4 ways to do it, and every one of them has a catch that people don't see coming. The first is selling and downsizing. This genuinely works, and it's the cleanest option, and I'd say it's underused rather than overused. The catch is that people wildly overestimate how much they'll clear. You sell for $400,000, you pay realtor commissions and closing costs, and then you buy the smaller place, which in the same market is not as much cheaper as you assumed because everything went up together. And then there's moving costs and furnishing and probably some repairs on the new place. People imagine downsizing releases $200,000. Frequently it releases $60,000, and sometimes it releases nothing at all, because the smaller place in a nicer area costs the same. The version that genuinely works is downsizing and moving somewhere with a lower cost of living. That's where the real money is, and it also cuts your property taxes and insurance permanently, which matters more over 25 years than the lump sum does. The second way is a home equity loan or line of credit. And I'd be very careful here because you're taking on a monthly payment in retirement, using your house as collateral at a time when your income is fixed. If something goes wrong and you can't make the payment, the consequence is losing the house. The third is a reverse mortgage, which I want to discuss honestly rather than either promoting or dismissing, because the advertising on these is aggressive and the criticism is sometimes overheated. The basic idea is that you borrow against your equity, receive money without monthly payments, and the loan is repaid when you die or move out or sell. You have to be 62 or older, and the government-insured version is called a HECM. There are situations where it's a reasonable tool, particularly for somebody who is house-rich and cash-poor, intends to stay in the home for the rest of their life, and has no strong wish to leave the property to anybody. Here's what people don't understand. You still have to pay property taxes, homeowner's insurance, and maintain the home. If you fail to do those things, the loan can become due, and you can lose the house. People have lost homes to reverse mortgages over unpaid property taxes. The fees and closing costs are significant. Interest accrues on the balance, which grows over time, which means your equity shrinks steadily. And if you need to move into assisted living, the loan generally comes due, which can force a sale at exactly the worst moment. So it's not a scam, and it's not a solution. It's a specific tool for a specific situation, and anybody considering one should talk to a HUD-approved counselor, which is required for the insured version anyway, and should have an adult child or trusted person in the conversation. The fourth way, which is what a lot of people actually mean when they say they've got the house, is I'll deal with it later. And that's the one I'd push back on hardest, because later usually means during a crisis, and selling a house during a crisis is how you get a bad price. Here's the thing about home equity that nobody says plainly. It is not a retirement account. It's an illiquid asset whose value depends on local employment conditions that cost you money every month in taxes, insurance, and maintenance, and that you cannot spend a piece of when you need groceries. It's real wealth. It's just not income, and converting it into income always costs something. Everybody thinks they'll figure it out later, and later arrives on a Tuesday. Let me talk about timing, because I think this is where the lie does the most damage, and it's the part I got wrong myself. There's a window, roughly between 55 and 65, where almost every meaningful decision about your retirement gets made. And most people spend that window not deciding anything, because the decisions feel premature and there's always something more urgent. Then something happens and all the decisions get made at once, badly, under pressure. Let me list what's actually in that window, because I don't think people see it as a window at all. Your Social Security claiming decision, which, as I said, is the single biggest financial lever most Americans have, and which is permanent. Your Medicare enrollment at 65, with penalties for getting the timing wrong that last for the rest of your life. Your catch-up contributions, including that super catch-up available only between 60 and 63. Any Roth conversions you might want to do, which are best done in low-income years, which is typically after you stop working and before required distributions start. Your decision about long-term care planning, which needs to happen 5 years before you need it, because of the Medicaid look-back. Your healthcare power of attorney and financial power of attorney, which need to exist before you can't sign them. Your housing decision, because moving at 66 is a completely different proposition from moving at 81. And your investment allocation shift, because sequence of returns risk peaks in exactly these years. That is 9 consequential decisions, most of them permanent or expensive to reverse, all landing in about a 10-year span. And here's what actually happens to most people. They make none of them deliberately, they get made by default. Social Security gets claimed at 62 because the job ended. The allocation stays wherever it was set in 2009. The documents never get done. The house decision gets made by an adult child during a hospital discharge. Now, why does that happen? And I don't think it's laziness. I think it's that every one of those decisions requires you to think concretely about being old, being sick, and dying. And the human mind is genuinely bad at that, particularly about itself. It's much easier to think about it next year, and next year it's easier to think about it the year after. So let me give you the one piece of advice that I think is worth more than all the arithmetic in this video. Pick a date, one day a year, your birthday, or the first Saturday in January, or whatever you like. On that day, you sit down with a cup of coffee and a folder, and you look at the whole picture, what you have, what you spend, where the documents are, what your Social Security statement says, what your fees are, what's changed, 2 hours, once a year. That single habit is the difference between somebody who arrives at 75 having made a series of deliberate decisions and somebody who arrives at 75 having had a series of things happen to them. And I'd add one more thing. Do it with somebody, your spouse if you have one, and this is especially important if one of you handles the money and the other doesn't, because the statistics say one of you will be doing it alone eventually. If you're on your own, do it with a friend, or with an adult child if you're comfortable, or with a fee-only advisor. Because the thing that makes these decisions hard isn't the arithmetic, it's the loneliness of facing them. And 2 people at a kitchen table with a folder will get through in an afternoon what one person alone will avoid for 6 years.
Why I don't think anybody lied to us on purpose, and why that's worse.
Let me finish by saying what I actually think happened, because the word lie is in the title and I want to be precise about who did what. I don't think there was a room where somebody decided to deceive American workers. What I think happened is that we were handed a system that was designed for a different situation, and nobody updated the instructions. The 401k came out of a provision in a 1978 tax law, and it was originally understood as a supplement, something extra, on top of a pension, for people who wanted to save a bit more. It was never designed to be somebody's entire retirement. And then, over about 30 years, it became exactly that. Companies stopped offering pensions because the 401k transferred all the risk and cost to the employee. And the advice given to workers never really changed to reflect what a monumental shift that was. We kept being told the same things. Save 15%. Diversify. Stay the course. Work until 65. Every piece of that advice was written for people who also had a pension. Nobody rewrote it for people who didn't. And on top of that, 3 things happened that nobody planned for. Housing costs exploded, which absorbed the money that was supposed to go into savings. EBRI found that 60% of workers say high housing costs are already hurting their ability to save for retirement, and 7 in 10 worry housing costs will affect their retirement. Healthcare costs rose far faster than wages, so the amount you need went up while the amount you could save went down, and access became wildly unequal. Only about 41% of workers in the lowest wage quartile have access to a 401k at all, compared to 82% in the highest. Read that one again. The people who most need help accumulating retirement savings are less than half as likely to be offered the main vehicle for doing it. That's not a personal failure. That's a system that provides the tool primarily to people who were already going to be fine. So when somebody says Americans didn't save enough, my honest reaction is that an enormous number of Americans were never given the thing they were supposed to save into, and were then blamed for not using it. Now let me say the thing I most want you to hear, and then I'll let you go. If you are behind, I need you to stop carrying this as a personal shame. The median 401k balance in this country is $44,000. 1 in 4 people your age has less than $19,000. 28% have nothing. You are not an outlier. You are the middle of the distribution, and the people you're comparing yourself to, the ones in the retirement advertisements, and the ones who post about their portfolios, are either exceptional or lying, and frequently both. What you can do is smaller than what the industry sold you, and it is not nothing. Know your Social Security claiming options and understand what delaying is worth. Use the catch-up contributions if you can. Check your fees this week. Look hard at your housing costs. Build a cash cushion so you're never a forced seller. And find out what you actually spend so your number is a real number, instead of a fear. That's the honest list. It won't get you a beach house. It will meaningfully change what your 70s look like. Americans are finally waking up to this, and I think that's genuinely good. Because the first step out of a bad situation is being told the truth about it, and this industry has not been in the truth-telling business for a very long time. If you're behind and you've never said it out loud to anybody, say it in the comments. You will find you have a great deal of company, and I think that matters more than any number I gave you today. And do me one favor before you go. If you know somebody in their early 50s who's been telling themselves they'll just work longer, send them this. Not to frighten them, because they still have time to build the plan around the age they might be forced out at instead of the age they hope to leave at, and that adjustment is worth more the earlier somebody makes it. We keep it real here for all of us. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye for now.